I've been having a lot of fun lately looking at all the great sci-fi movies of the 1950s, which I'll leave some links to in the description below. But it made me really curious about which movie in particular changed the whole future landscape of sci-fi movies the most. That's when I landed on Forbidden Planet. That movie changed the landscape of Hollywood science fiction in a way that was unlike any other movie of the time. It went on to influence sci-fi films for decades. So strap yourselves in, because this deep dive is taking us straight to Altair 4. We're talking spaceships, robots, the works, and a monster that still creeps me out. So, let's get into it. Fantasy, sci-fi, nostalgia, rerun zone. Forbidden Planet, not your average sci-fi flick. It's interesting how Forbidden Planet breaks out of the typical sci-fi mold. It's visually impressive for sure, but there's this whole other level digging into human nature, ambition, what happens when technology gets out of hand. Really deep stuff. If you take a look at many of the 1950s sci-fi flicks, you'll find giant radioactive insects, aliens invading the Earth, and more one-dimensional trips to the moon than you can shake a stick at. Then along comes Forbidden Planet, a 1956 sci-fi film and a forerunner of contemporary science fiction cinema. Journey to the Stars and the id Monster. For those of you who haven't seen Forbidden Planet, it's the 23rd century, and there's a starship crew on a mission to Altair 4. Their mission is to find out what happened to an earlier expedition that just vanished. What they find is this brilliant but quirky scientist, Dr. Morbius, and his daughter, Altera. She's basically grown up cut off from Earth, completely isolated. And then there's Robbie the robot. He's a whole other discussion, doing complex things and even cracking jokes, but completely bound by rules his creators programmed into him, like not being able to hurt humans. Artificial intelligence, all its potential but limitations built right in. Then there's the invisible monster. But wait a minute, before we go there, I want to talk about Forbidden Planet's inspiration. It's basically Shakespeare's The Tempest in space. It adds whole layers to the story. This movie wasn't just another schlocky sci-fi romp. Instead, it dared to ask the question, what happens when technology outpaces the human mind's ability to control its own dark desires? That's pretty deep for a 1950 sci-fi flick. Then there's the special effects. Pretty advanced for 1956. I mean, it pretty much blew everything else out of the water. Oh, and that monster, the id Monster? It wasn't just some guy in a suit. Nope, they brought in a professional animator, a Disney animator no less, to design the creature. Totally groundbreaking stuff for the time, and it worked even better than expected. In fact, it really freaked people out big time. Some states actually tried to censor it because they thought the id Monster was way too scary. That's how good it was. It actually sparked a moral panic. Tells you a lot about the power of visuals and how Forbidden Planet really pushed the envelope. The electronic soundtrack controversy. Forget about those big orchestras. Forbidden Planet went totally out there with all electronic music. The music was composed by Beebe and Louis Barron and was credited as electronic tonalities due to their not being members of the Musicians Union. In fact, it caused a huge uproar. The Musicians Union was furious. They saw it as a threat, this new electronic technology. It got so bad that the Barons weren't even eligible for an Academy Award for the score. That's how controversial it was. Just goes to show you, Forbidden Planet was way ahead of its time in more ways than one. I mean, they got slammed for it, but it all worked. The visuals, the music, it all just fit together. The Krell, subconscious desires, and a warning for the future. Forbidden Planet explores very deep themes, like the idea of unchecked ambition. That's a big one. It makes you wonder what will happen if we just keep chasing progress, but don't stop to think about what it could lead to. There's always a downside. And that's where the id Monster comes in. It's not just some unconscious creature, it symbolizes something even bigger. So before humans showed up on Altair 4, there was this whole other civilization called the Krell, who were way more advanced than us. They figured out how to create anything they wanted with just the power of their minds. Who wouldn't want that power, right? But that's where Forbidden Planet gets it right. The Krell were so focused on this power that they missed something crucial: their own subconscious desires. You know, those primal instincts that we all have. The stuff we try to keep hidden. So the id monster actually came out of their own dark side. The id monster was them and all their repressed thoughts amplified by their technology. It destroyed them in the end. It's like a warning to the future: be careful what you wish for, and don't ignore that inner self, no matter how advanced your technology gets. That's the thing with Forbidden Planet. It's not just some mindless action movie. It makes you think about the responsibility that comes with power, with knowledge. Like, what are we doing with all this progress? And yeah, good intentions are great, but sometimes they're just not enough. It makes you think about our own desires. Our drive to discover and achieve can actually blind us to the risks. And that's what makes this movie Forbidden Planet so relevant even now, all these years later. It asks the timeless questions about what it means to be human. Are we really equipped to deal with all this power we keep chasing after? Or are we always going to be tripped up by our own nature? Especially for a movie about a giant invisible monster. But that's what's so brilliant about this movie. It takes these sci-fi elements, the visuals, the music, and uses them to explore these deep philosophical ideas. And you can see that influence everywhere. I mean, Star Trek? So much of it traces right back to Forbidden Planet. That feeling of exploration, of what's out there, but also the dangers of the unknown. Even the look of it, you can see there's a connection. Even Star Trek creator Gene Roddenberry acknowledged Forbidden Planet as a major influence on his work. And it goes beyond Star Trek too. Jurassic Park, that whole thing about humans thinking they can control nature, and then it backfires spectacularly. Or Ex Machina, that whole ethical mess with AI. It's like these themes, these questions, they're hardwired into the movie. What gets me is how relevant they still are. Makes you wonder, what can we actually learn from Forbidden Planet? As we keep pushing boundaries with technology, with knowledge, what mistakes can we avoid? That's the big question. It's a conversation we can't afford to ignore. Forbidden Planet is a powerful reminder that progress without thinking, without considering the consequences, can go really, really wrong. Before we go, here's something to think about. What if you had the Krell's power? You know, the ability to create anything with just your mind. What would you do? What would you create? And more importantly, what would you do to make sure it didn't turn into some kind of monster and destroy everything? It's something to chew on, because who knows, that kind of future might be closer than we think. Now, if you like classic sci-fi, TVs, movies, and nostalgia, you're going to love it here at Rerun Zone. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on the way out. This is Rich from Rerun Zone. Good night.